There's a great video that discusses the balance of exploitation versus exploration, and you have to be able to do both, and you need to sit in the balance of those two. So you need to be able to explore enough to keep looking ahead and forecasting and shifting and changing, and then be balanced enough in the pragmatic of exploiting what you have now and making the most of it, because if you live in one or the other, that's to your demise.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Ways to Wealth. Today I am glad to be joined by Greg Alnutt. Greg, why don't you give us an introduction on who you are and how you got here, and kind of a little bit on I guess what your business is about.
Well, kia ora. I'm a partner at a business called Pivot and Pace, and I guess our expertise lies in strategy and strategy implementation, and that's my background. I would be described as a pracademic with a blend of academic expertise, experience in both the commercial and from the military sectors.
Awesome. That's really cool. So you've gone into business ownership or partnership, but that's really business ownership, right? And you're implementing what you learn in the military and applying that to businesses and success broadly.
Yeah, and the experience in our team has generally been it's a blend of military experience that then's been taken into the commercial sector, adapted, and tweaked and adjusted to be able to fit, but then giving that momentum to commercial businesses who actually need those skills to be into it, especially in the medium business space within New Zealand, where they're getting levels of complexity that they need to be able to navigate more intentionally.
Right. Yeah. So kind of that once you're kind of starting to scale up and things are getting a bit out of control.
Yeah. So beyond that small business, but there's a whole lot of people working in the small business space. There's a whole lot doing the large, but it's actually the piece that generates the biggest sort of growth in New Zealand is in that scaling business space and that medium size with 60 to 150 sort of people or more, and going
Right.
through those growth phases. Yeah.
Right. So that's your sweet spot. Is that 60 to 150 in terms of headcount?
Yeah. Well, it's sort of where it starts, right, and then it can stretch out from there. Yeah.
Right. Because someone might start 100 and they might, by the time you're done working with them, they might be at 300 people.
Oh, we've worked with some who have grown to 600 or 700. Yeah. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Okay. Wicked. Um, but Pivot and Pace wasn't where it all started. There's like a whole lineage of history there, preparing you for basically creating the business or, going into partnership on the business. So like, I guess the first thing is were you always entrepreneurial?
Well, no, I started in the military as a private soldier, and then got selected for officer training, and then spent 20 years in the leadership space, leading organizations up to 500 people. It was as I was in more the senior end of my career, I was deployed to Afghanistan, and I was working with the Afghan police and also the Afghan version of MI5 in a region,
Right.
and recognized when they were trying to access international funding to grow the capability and capacity of those two organizations, but they had nothing to pin their requests against, and they couldn't tell the story of what they were trying to achieve. So I did strategy with both of those organizations, help them create a vision of what they were trying to be, create a plan, and then actually then start executing on that plan. And they started then taking those plans to funding providers and being able to tell the story and go, well, this is what we're trying to achieve, and this is what the funding would assist. And so that was my first delve into strategy. And I really enjoyed the process. I enjoyed the ability to be able to help people tell that, what their organizations were trying to achieve. And it was really, so that was 2005, so 20 years ago. But then from then on, started doing it in organizations that I was leading later on within the army, within the government sector, within New Zealand when I was in the New Zealand Transport Agency, and then into the commercial sector when I was in construction, and then into consulting with other businesses and rationalizing that thinking. So it's been a real journey of doing, exploring, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, and then being able to now adapt that to help other businesses. It's great.
Sure, yeah, totally. And I guess what originally led you to join the army then? If we take a right step back to that initial decision, because that's obviously formed that one decision has formed much of your education and much of your experience, and then kind of been a kind of fundamental underpinning of all of your commercial success afterwards.
Yeah, I think for me, I'd been fortunate to be brought up in an environment where my dad took me hunting and tramping, and I was enjoying the outdoors. I like that challenge. And it was just something that I always wanted to do. And then I joined the military. I think I needed the structure personally as a little kid who was sort of go a bit wayward at times. And that helped me. And then I never saw myself as a leader, but within that environment, I seemed to be able to be successful and was acknowledged for that and then taken through into officer training because of that. And then the military is a very good place for training people in leadership and in technical skills and the ability to stand up in front of people and to think and plan and make those things work. And so that just kept going for me. And I was then very fortunate to be in a unit that was doing things like parachuting and climbing off the side of a frigate in the middle of the night in the Marlborough Sounds, or jumping into secure airfields, or suspended flying along under helicopters and doing all those sorts of things. And so it was very exciting, and it was great when you're a young man doing things that the adrenaline rush of it all. And then I was fortunate in the military to then start. I was selected to be a trainer of people who wanted to specialize in those core infantry skills. And that was my first um, foray into sort of coaching and instructing and teaching, which arguably is what I do sometimes now with the coaching when we're providing it to businesses. And so
Right.
it's almost like all of those skills, like you say, you learn earlier in your career, I've been fortunate come to a pinnacle point for me. And my purpose now is, creating a legacy of inspired leaders and resilient and capable businesses for New Zealand Incorporated. That's just applying
Right.
the same skills in a different space, but it was always about helping other people be better. Yeah.
Right. Could you could you give me some of the nuances that you were facing in that kind of Iraq era? Was it Iraq, or was it no? It was where you were trying to help them basically secure funding and actually like improve their infrastructure. Um,
Oh, that was in Afghanistan. Yeah.
sorry, Afghanistan. So could you give me some of the nuances on what you like? How were you positioned in those conversations, and then how did you influence? I guess because you get into a situation, and then you obviously are then feeling things out, and then you're helping them by being strategic, and you're helping them push forward. But you would have come in and you dropped in at a certain point with a certain context and with a certain position in the kind of sphere of influence. How did you kind of navigate that? And then what were some of the nuances that you dealt with that maybe are not commonplace in New Zealand, perhaps?
Oh, I think, arguably across the world, because I've worked in many places from Angola to Bougainville, Kuwait, East Timor, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Um, the nature of people is sort of similar. When you go into those environments and you're dealing with an Afghan police chief or the head of the MI5, um, they're cynical. None of them are without blood on their hands from the previous conflict. There's corruption. There's all those sorts of things, and they're sitting there going, "Who's this guy?" Right? And so the first thing is building, I think, a rapport and building trust, and it was building the relationships. Then it was demonstrating them through sort of like storytelling and things like that of going, where are you trying to go? If you were going on a trip somewhere, you'd be wanting to be able to plan for that trip. This is the same for your organization, but how are you going to do that? And then they'd sort of go, well, I just want you to write it for me. And I went, well, that's not going to help solve anything. So I'm going to actually teach you how to do it, get you involved in the process. And then you walk out committed to actually wanting to make that happen. Um, and so, yeah, we went through a process of that. And then, even the interesting thing is they were very hierarchical. And then you had younger staff within their teams involved, and you gave them a voice, and suddenly they were coming forward with good ideas as well. And so was quite a learning for some of those leaders in those organizations to recognize it didn't need to come from the top. And actually, it was, the military is quite a collaborative planning uh, organization. It's a people-based organization, and you have to recognize you're not the smartest person in the room. You've got good people around you. How do you leverage that? Sure, you need to make some decisions sometimes, and when the shit's hitting the fan, you need to be able to do that and have the confidence to do that without being collaborative, because there's no time to pause and stop. But on most times, you're pausing and you're very deliberate in the planning and trying to get the best outcomes. And so that was sort of teaching them to go through that process, and do it differently. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then that's the same in business now, right? If you're getting a managing director who's sitting there thinking that they're the smartest person in the room, then they've hired the wrong people. And it's then, how do you get the voices from around the table to start contributing to the plan, owning the plan, and making it work?
Totally.
It's to have, honestly, what you're trying to do is get a shared vision of where they're trying to go. And getting it shared is that everyone then has a part in making it and deciding it.
Right. Yeah. And do you feel like that like a lot of that revelation came while you were on tour, or was it in reflection after you'd done your time and you were writing the book and you know?
And I think it was sort of probably multi-layered. I certainly started to realize it at the time, and then as you look back on it, you start to realize for certain what that was, and then as it becomes apparent. And I think that's one of the tips, for later on, is that reflective process of being able to pause and look back and going, what have I learned here? What have I done? What would I have done differently? What would I keep doing based on that? And those sorts of things as a leader and as a person. It's taken that time to reflect and be intentional about that.
Yeah. Okay. So it was a mixture of both.
Mm.
What was your objective when you wrote the book, Keeping the Peace?
Uh, I wanted to educate a wider New Zealand population. I'd gone to Anzac Day. I'd left the military. I was still pretty young. I was only in my early 40s, and I had my medals on. And admittedly, I have a number of medals, so they sort of extend across my chest. And someone came up to me and said, "Are they your dad's or your granddad's medals?" And I went, "No, they're mine." And he went, "Oh." I mean, he was quite surprised. And then I went to get my daughter a Milo that morning, and someone said, "How many generations do they go back?" And I just, "One, just me." And then someone challenged my wife later on in the day, going, "You're not meant to wear those medals on that side, only people who've earned them," because she was in the military as well. And she goes, "I did earn them, they are mine." And then she goes, "Oh, where did you serve?" And she said, "East Timor." And the old lady went, "Oh, and did you enjoy that?" And she goes, "No, I bloody didn't." Um, and so after that one morning, I went home thinking, why doesn't anyone understand that we have modern veterans,
Right.
and they don't understand what we've done and the
Right.
environment we've
And
built.
it's not necessarily a kind of present kind of
It's not
crisis.
present in the media. It's not understanding that, and it's then always sold as peacekeepings, i.e., keeping the peace. And yet, we've been in conflict zones where when I was in East Timor, we were ambushing people and they were getting killed, and people were on our side were getting killed as well. When we were in Afghanistan, sure, we were in what would be called a reconstruction team, but it was in a war, right? And no one questioned in the Second World War that someone was over here building bridges. Oh, you're not in the war. You won the war. And when you were in Iraq, we had people in there and it was still a full-blown war. We were performing different roles, but it doesn't negate the fact of the nature of where we were. And those modern conflict environments in what's called a three-block war scenario. On one scenario, you can have conflict, on another is peace support, and on another one is humanitarian aid. And it's in with three contiguous blocks. And so it was trying to do that. So I came home, I storyboarded a book on one page and went, I'm going to start writing it. And I got halfway written it through writing it, and I took it to a publisher, and he went, I'll publish that. And so it took it from there. And it was never about making money. It's never going to be a bestseller, but I really love it now that it's being used by the RSA to help
Right.
uh, inform new staff coming on of going, this is what who modern veterans are. This is what they've done. And so that's part of what I was trying to do.
So did you meet your partner, your wife, in the military?
Yes.
And she was serving at the same, as she was, yeah, okay, so you met her here, and then you guys did you have, you don't have conflicting tours, or does that
No,
all the time apart?
that was managed by the military. There's any number of people in the military who both partners are in the military, and so they recognised someone has to stay home and look after the kids. Um, and so my wife did deploy when we had a young daughter as well, and so I was then looking after our daughter, and then in that time managed about 4 short notice deployments from our base as well. So on one occasion, my parents had come up for a long weekend, and I got a phone call at 2 a.m. going, "Job's on. We need to deploy some troops." And luckily I could walk in and go, "Mum, can you look after Sophie? I'll be home when I'm home. I might be home in 2 days. But can you do that?" And they went, "Does this happen often?" And I went, occasionally, yeah. So,
Right. Okay.
and that's the other part of it, right? Is what families put up with people within the military who are getting deployed. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that that's got better or worse, that awareness?
Oh, I think in New Zealand society, a perception of Anzac Day is that all veterans were the old guys, right? And now it's the Vietnam guys, and it's just like there's tens of thousands of modern veterans. I think it just goes a little under the radar. I think there are organisations like the RSA and a few others trying to increase that awareness. But yeah, there's a lot of people who have served, and they're all making a great impact in society around New Zealand after they leave the military. Like just like me, transferring their skills. Yeah.
So you said you mentioned you said you were quite young when you got out of the military, early 40s.
Yeah.
Um, I guess, was it a joint decision? Like, did you and your wife get out of the military at the same time, or did you leave at different times? And then, what was what was the motivating factor for kind of leaving?
Um, my wife and I got out at a similar time, within 1 or so years of each other, and it was very intentional. I had started in the unit I left as a private soldier. I finished as the commanding officer, and I thought that was nice bookends to a career. I also thought I was capable of doing other things, and I wanted to explore that. I didn't want, and that military experience. I'd done 6 operational tours. My wife had done 2. It was starting to have impact on where we wanted to be as a family, and how we wanted our children to grow up. So there were a number of factors, but and when I left, a lot of people said, "Why did you leave? You've got a great future in the military. You're sort of silly to leave." And then 15 years later, some of those people are stuck in the military, and they went, "You made a great choice when you left when you did." Because I'm 15 years ahead in a career. I own my own business. And a lot of them have gone, "Wow, now you were actually quite smart in doing that." I just knew I could do more, and I wanted to try that out, right? I didn't want to have been a one-dimensional person for my life.
Right.
And so I think I planned ahead on that. My business partner, he used to laugh at me going, he's one of the most planned guys, but it's like I didn't have an education. So I said, right, I'm getting a master's degree because when I leave, I want to have a qualification and I wanted to have done these things. And I was quite calculated. I went to the public sector first to broaden my experience whilst it was still sort of government. And then I left from there and because it was a crown entity. And then I went into commercial and shifted that. So it was this whole thing of knowing, and this is what I coach people sometimes on, is knowing what race you want to run. And then what are the waypoints along there, and what do you need to run that race, and run your own race, and don't look over the fence and look at someone else's race, because if someone beside you's running and jumping, and you're running and jumping, but they're running the 100-meter hurdles and you're doing the 3,000 steeples, but they look the same, and each one has trade-offs. Yeah.
Well, we don't all start. Yeah, like you say, we all run different races, and we definitely aren't starting at the same points. And
Right.
I think that it's about playing the hand that you have and then playing it well. There's a really great book that I often recommend that's called "Thinking in Bets" by Annie Duke,
Mhm.
and she was a professional poker player, and she's pivoted into basically uh, venture and hedge fund advisory for their teams for performance. And the book is basically about disassociating outcomes from decisions. because you can make decisions, and you'll know this better than anyone else, without complete information, and you're actually trying to hone your skills for making good decisions with incomplete information, with the information you have, and then the outcome is, in a sense, disconnected from the decision. The decision is often the important part.
Yeah.
Um,
So there's things from the military where we used to refer to that as the fog of war. You will never have all of the information you want to make that decision. So get used to making decisions in ambiguity, and that's what a lot of business owners need to do. And then it's a series of decisions from then on as you confirm or deny your assumptions or your hypothesis, and keep iterating and adjusting. And that's what strategy is. It's not this direct plan from here to there. It's here's the intention, and now let's start doing stuff. And the old saying by Patton, a good plan violently executed today will beat the perfect plan done tomorrow. And so it's just start executing and then iterate. Yeah.
yeah, I think uh, it's easy to get lost in in the pursuit of the future. I was actually talking to my friend about it earlier today. He's a portfolio manager, and I was saying, that the difficulty, because he was being quite reflective of talking about his birthday, and what he would. He's a bit older than me. He's probably a good 15 years older than me or so, maybe more. And he was saying, "Oh, what would I tell my 33-year-old self today, now that I'm 50?" And he was thinking about it, and he was talking about the the future, and how living for a future is can have its downsides. And I was talking, and then I mentioned, oh well, I think that the difficulty and for an entrepreneur, a business owner, or an investor, as someone that's actually making investments, is that you're paid to live in the future, but but if you obsess and live only in the future, you miss the journey, and you miss the moment, and you basically kind of almost end up not living, which has negative effects for your operations and implementation potentially, and it definitely affects your psyche, because you can't live in that.
So there's a great video that discusses the balance of exploitation versus exploration, and you have to be able to do both. And you need to sit in the balance of those two. So you need to be able to explore enough to keep looking ahead and forecasting and shifting and changing, and then be balanced enough in the pragmatic of exploiting what you have now and making the most of it. Because if you live in one or the other, that's to your demise.
Right. Okay, that's cool. And so you mentioned, I had one question that it left me, and now I remember. Were you always super motivated? Like, were you always this motivated? You obviously made the most of your career in the army, and you managed to, like you said, you had a really good arc of your journey within that kind of phase of your life. And you mentioned that you were taking advantage of all. Like, was that kind of something that, was there a catalyst during your training when you joined the army?
I would challenge it that it's not about motivation, because motivation ebbs and wanes. I was very disciplined, I
Right.
think. And so if I decided I was doing something, I was doing it well.
Right.
And it was the discipline to either study, or the discipline to put time aside, or the discipline to train hard, or the discipline to apply myself to be uh, good at something. It's discipline beats motivation, right?
That
Um,
that that's quite interesting, because I mean, I would say, my co-founder was also went to officers school training, and he served a number of tours as well. And I would characterize him as disciplined, extremely disciplined. And I would characterize myself as less disciplined. However, I'm good at that momentum piece, you know? And it's interesting that you kind of said, well, it's not motivation. I would say I would consider myself highly motivated, um, and constantly, but actually it's probably, like you say, it's more about the fact that I guess I'm okay just walking in the mud for longer than most other people, perhaps.
and,
Um,
and and momentum is built up by consistent incremental gains, right?
which
And so consistent effort. And yes, it requires motivation, but it's going to be more about the discipline that does it. I'm in a band, and the ability to learn something new when I'm a drummer. and the ability to learn a new song or that's beyond you, or get your left foot doing something while your right hand's doing something else or whatever. And I can sit there and go, holy shit, I just can't do this. But it's the discipline to break that down and do it logically and progressively, and then sit there at the end of it going, done it. If you were motivated but were not disciplined, you'd walk away from it and just go, you know. So anyway, and that's again the same for business, is trying to get them the discipline and the cadence of executing the strategy and doing their little things. And then a year down the track, they look back at themselves and go, holy shit, we are different.
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, because you don't see it. You often don't see it until you take stock, right?
Yeah.
And I think that
People look at the finished product of an athlete or whomever, and they don't see all the hard training. They don't see the failures. They just go, I want to be like that. And they don't see what's transpired before that. Yeah.
it's the 10-year overnight successes
Absolutely.
that everyone talks about. And my first jiu-jitsu coach always told me that if you just get 1% better every day, and obviously as an investor and a finance guy, I think about progress, incremental progress, regardless of how you feel, probably compounds like crazy, because it's like going 1% every day.
Yeah, but here's the thing as well. So I just, for the last 2 days, ran a strategy session for a New Zealand tech business. Yeah, and they're looking at their next stage of funding. And the big part of it is the strategy tells the intention, the future story. The past tells the discipline of their ability to do it. And the investor is buying the story based on the evidence. And that's what they want to be able to do. And so that's the space we quite often play in, is being able to do that and help people articulate their direction clearly, and then be able to improve their ability to execute on that from where they've come from. Because sometimes with a business, and the same with a leader, is what's got them to here isn't what's going to get them to there. And it's being able to help them go through those changes.
And you kind of have to rediscover that potentially sometimes, right? Because in the pursuit and the discipline of doing it every day, you may actually lose sight of the reason you started, and actually the reason you're going to continue to that next level may actually be a different reason now.
That's right.
Interesting. That's cool. So you talked about legacy earlier. You said you wanted to leave a legacy. Does your legacy start with your family?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you want to, I think, and even I remember talking with my father. I think, well, most generations just want to leave the next generation in a better place, right? And that they've brought them up to be able to have opportunity and success that they didn't. And that's what my parents did for me. And that's what I'm trying to do for my children as well, right? And so that, and it's different for everyone. And that's what we even see with intergenerational businesses, and trying to navigate that and help them go through generations and do it in the way that's going to set the next generation up for success, as opposed to you're on your own, make it happen sort of thing. And that's where we are. But I think in that space, like you said, each person starts the race differently. I think the gap for people is increasing. So the ones who have been able to do that a little, are just increasingly moving away from those who are just starting out or come from a different background. And that's where you're just getting that divide within, New Zealand. And I saw the other day just on Instagram, the biggest growing sector in America was billionaires. In the last recent while, the number of billionaires that has grown in the last 10 years is more than it's ever been. Yeah.
Right.
And so again, that separation of the wealth gap.
Totally. What would you say, because you've got a bit of experience then in that intergenerational business perspective, what are the key differences of the innate kind of characteristics, I would say, of those then that are getting it right? Because I've talked to recent, at the start of the year with the podcast, I talked to a guy that's in the kind of farming industry, and he was talking about the intergenerational nature of that and some of the pitfalls. So, would you mind maybe giving us some light on that?
Well, and so there's a number of facets, I guess. Firstly, is that they've set it up in a way that they are able to extract value out of that as they seek to depart the business and retire, and done it in a way that others can then buy into that or be part of that, want to, be able to carry that forward. It's a shame when I've heard of family businesses where they've gone, or family farms, because they are businesses, and going, well, I want to get out. Have you got 4 million to buy me out? And the kids are going, no, I don't. How could we do that differently? And, you know, there's that tension there, and then they're going, well, we can't, and we don't want to take that over. So you might as well just sell it, because that you need to fund your retirement and get the fruits of your labor and your effort, right? But how can they set up structures to be able to enable that to happen? And then if it's handing over only to one person in a family, having those trust structures that enable to distribute the wealth across either the first generation, and then you're layering into second generations. And so it requires a lot of forethought. Too often people leave that too late, and then they're going, they're in their 70s and they're trying to get out of the business. Part of the challenge will be that is the identity of the founder will be attached to the business, and
Right.
the business is them and they are the business. And so to be able to disassociate themselves with that, have something purposeful that they want to go on to do, and that the business isn't reliant on them. And so they need to have built a business that they're able to spend time away from, so that others are able to lead it on their behalf and or take it over. And so we work with a number, and one of the founders now is able to go on three-month surfing trips, because the CEO runs the business. He sits there in governance, and that's another good requirement to have, is good governance in place, so that you have a level of independence helping oversee and look after the business, and having the mechanisms in place that others are able to do it on their behalf. And then he gets paid his dividends based on the business doing well, and all that, and all parties are happy. Yeah.
But in terms of the culture when it's family, what sort of culture, like, is there any characteristics on how the original leader kind of created the culture that enables that, I guess, smooth transition and maybe timely transition? Because you mentioned that timing makes a big difference. And I think that in the prior episode, we talked about, you want to be, and you'll know this also from your time in the military and then what you've done afterwards, is you don't really want to be jumping out of an aircraft when you're in your 70s. You want to be jumping out your aircraft, preferably when you're maybe mid-30s, right? So, and it's the same with a business. Often, you don't want to have the hard slog when when you're ready to kind of hang it up almost anyway.
Oh, look, and I've worked with business leaders who are in their 80s still in the business, right? Because they've left it too late, or they don't have anything else they want to do, and so it's never going to happen. And so um the culture of it is that they've thought about it and they're getting ahead of it. And then they need to have transparency, accountability. There needs to be clarity of policies around other family members being employed in the business, and how that works. And it's setting up some of that criteria then to understand the difference between shareholding, governance, and management, and knowing which hats they are wearing on a daily basis. Because just because you're a shareholder doesn't entitle you to be a manager, and it doesn't, or whatever. And your role within the business as an employee, and trying to get clarity for people on what do those different expectations have, and that openness to be able to discuss that and be clear on that. Because there's obviously other employees who are not family members, and how does that work, and what do we expect of leaders. And it's not because of name and title, that they are therefore getting one thing or the other. And so again, it's sometimes getting the right advisors around some of these people, because some of these businesses that are being very successful, but it's having that, I would say, open and trusted and honest insight and guidance, because some of these businesses don't know what they don't know as well.
Yeah.
And it's that they need to seek to have professional expertise brought in at different junctures as well.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. So you basically did a bunch of commercial stuff, both in the public sector, and then you moved private, kind of commercial, a lot of kind of management and leadership across the board,
Mhm.
management and delivery. And then you, after a stint teaching or lecturing, you got into the advisory space, right? So that's kind of, I guess, that was the next kind of step into what would then be business ownership and equity ownership.
Yeah.
So I guess how long was it before you got into that gig, or was it during that gig that you decided to, oh, I could do something myself, I could do it better, or, I could build my own business?
It was during that gig. And the interesting thing, I found out what I was passionate about because I'd uh, restructured myself out of a role because I didn't fit in the organization for where it was in one role. And I started consulting. And after a year of consulting, my accountant came to me and said, "Are you aware that you paid more tax last year than you have earned this year?" That was the difference in my earnings, right? So, and I went, "Yeah, I'm quite aware of that. Thank you." Because I went from earning this to earning this, right? And the tax bill on that was more than I was earning over here. And I went, "But I'm good at this. I'm really passionate about this. And I reckon I'm going to make a go of this. And so I just need you to back me and show me how I can get through this tough patch." And within a year, I was earning more than I'd ever earned. But that was because I was passionate about it. I loved it. And I just loved coming to work every day, doing what I did and making that impact. And the impact and the work what I was doing within where I started this consulting gig and enabled me to pick that up. And that's when me and my business partner grew the Christchurch business to be a third of the national business that we were in. Um, and the owner recognized that we could probably walk and take all of our clients. And so we did the right thing and he offered us to buy it. And we said, "Yeah, we'll buy it off you." And we did. And that's when we started our own business. And then shortly after that, rebranded it and did our own thing.
So the strategic advisor at Advisory Works mm, is essentially Pivot and Pace in a sense, a rebranded
Yeah.
or
Yeah, advisory work still exists, but we separated off and went in a slightly different direction. Yeah.
right, cool. Nice. And did you start thinking about when did you start thinking about wealth and building equity, if at all? Or have you never really thought about that?
Oh, no, I've always thought about that, and my wife and I have been quite planned on that, and, we've tried that with property and investments and those sorts of things, recognizing at some point we'll want to retire and what will that look like, um, and then designed our lives and lifestyle around that, and it's not about big flash things or anything else. It's about, living comfortably, but enjoying travel and enjoying surfboards. You always need another surfboard. Um, and that's what we're passionate about. And then being able to bring our kids up in a lifestyle in a way that does that, whilst then also putting enough money into a number of things, owning our own business, owning property, different types of property portfolios and investments. Because whether it's for us or for our children, then it's being able to help them be able to maybe access that easier. Well, I'm certainly not a person who has a desire to do everything for my kids so that they never have to do that. I think they need to learn the value of money, and they have. Um, when our eldest daughter at the moment she's 20, comes on holiday, we will pay for the holiday to get the ticket, and then she pays us off the money by the time we go on the holiday, so that she learns that it's no longer on the bank of mum and dad. And it's been things like that along the way that, if you need a car, we'll get you a car, but you're going to pay us back half of it. Those sorts of things, because it's some of those things now I think are just outside kids' reach. And the commitments now also we're seeing, say in professional services businesses, we're seeing people struggle because they go, "Oh, we need a new partner," and you've got these younger generation people now who who've got bigger mortgages than
Right.
our parents ever had, right? Or even we've ever had. and they're just going, we can't access enough capital and have a house and be a partner and do these other things. And they're making choices to go, actually, that's less important to me. And so that, that's the challenge that
I think there's a shift coming though, right? Because I think that, I mean, we do a lot of work with employers. We run financial well-being programs with employers that's focused on financial literacy and kind of fundamentals rather than selling product. So it's a productless product in the sense of consuming a KiwiSaver, an insurance and mortgage service. And cash flow is really what kills everyone. And especially in our generation, like you say, or my generation, should I say. And yeah, the obtainability and just the sheer amount of debt that I guess our generation has to take on in order to get assets, get access to the preferred asset in New Zealand. Right? But I do think that's probably shifting a little bit now. I think people are looking at business ownership more seriously, especially since 2020 as well. Because I think a lot of people got a taste of it, of that independence. And I think that's really quite good, but it's going to take some time for it to for you to see the fruits in a profound way. But like you say, the obtainability then becomes overwhelming. And that obviously holds everyone back because it means that the business owner may not have a succession plan. And it means that unfortunately, the younger person may not build the equity that they could potentially build. And then you have basically two losing kind of participants.
Yeah.
And that was kind of, I was thinking when you were talking about, well, when the farm owner then decides, oh, well, I'm going to sell up, right? I think about the fortunate situation we're in with our business. And, we've worked very hard for the last 5 years to get to where we are. And I kind of said to my wife, I said, people like me aren't probably supposed to have this business from where I came from, right? Coming from where I came from and the background I had and even the education that I originally had before I got into the business world, I go, I shouldn't own this much of it. And I think it's a shame when that future generation has to lose that asset that is going to compound and grow and going to be something worth much, 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 much more in 10 years. But they couldn't keep hold of it, right? And a lot of life, I think, is about holding on to that asset base and kind of continuing to let it compound. And I was thinking about that when you were talking about, when business owners or the future generation just says, hey, I can't do it. Or the potential partner that goes, what am I supposed to do? I earn, let's say $100,000, but I put 5% down on a home and I don't have any cash at the end of the month.
Yeah.
How do you get that? But I think as a business leader and a business owner, you have to help your employees find that way to equity. I think it's incumbent on you because that's your sphere of influence.
And what we're seeing is some of the smarter ones and they're getting in front of that and they're using various options around developing funds or changing ownership structures and things like that, and just trying to do things differently. Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's cool. That's good to hear. Awesome. Well, what about kind of future gazing then, I guess? So pivot and pace 5 years from now, what's success look like?
I think for us, we always want to remain boutique. And because it's not about growing size and scale, it's about making the impact. That's always been our gratification, and it is that legacy, and it's just sort of increasing the reach and the impact of people we've been able to help support go through challenges and changes. And for us, the interesting thing is you can help a person change as a leader. I've had CEOs come to me who are nearly going to be fired and then within 6 months turn themselves around and had the biggest turnaround in their individual performance versus we had a business we started working with that was only 60 people and sold for $1.05 billion and got the text that night going, boys, you helped us make 10 millionaires in Christchurch tonight. Both of those are equally as rewarding for me. They're both just successes. And that sort of thing. And that's just what we're going to continue to do. And hopefully, we'll be able to bring a few good people in and around us and just continue to do that. But it's not about growing and scaling for the sake of growing and scaling. It's more about the impact we want to make with people. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. I think what may be quite a cool place to to end would be, you know, you're kind of being prepared for something. You can never really be prepared. But I think I think for our audience, especially, like, what are some hacks on basically try, trying to, like, in operating, actually, when you know that you're a little bit inept still, because we're always learning, right? You're always a little bit, if you're in a good place, you're kind of a little bit inept, and you're kind of on the way to being kind of, what, world class, or, really good. Um, so how do you?
In New Zealand, we keep telling ourselves we're a little bit inept and that we're not good enough and all that sort of thing. And then actually, sometimes you just actually need to know there's always shit you can improve on, right? But stop beating ourselves up, or stop beating yourself up, and stop listening to that little voice on your shoulder going, if this is such a good idea, how come I've come up with it? And just tell them to park that and do what, trust yourself. I think seek insight, seek learning, go out and try and find things from other people. Surround yourself with good people who want to see you succeed, and they're going to give you those insights. But part of it is don't get trapped in today. So pull your head out of the back of the scrum, check that you're still pushing in the right direction. Occasionally get up into the coach's box and go, is the game plan still working? And occasionally sit back and go, what is the campaign for the season going to look like? Oh, and then get back in the scrum and push like shit. And you have to sort of be able to practice doing that and getting up into the different sorts of views, either or the helicopter view and the satellite view, and then get back down in the trenches. The people who can do that are the ones who are getting ahead, because you need to be able to future cast occasionally and go, what are we seeing? What are the patterns? What's going on? And trying to navigate that a little bit. Where do you want to be within Kui in 10 years' time, sort of like for your family, for yourself, for your business or whatever? What's it going to look like at the 2 to 3 year mark? And then get back in today and go, what's the first things we need to do on that? That's what you need to be keeping on doing. Too many people are just trapped on the mouse wheel, right? Just running around. And then 10 years passes and they go, holy shit, what did I do with all that? That's the bit about trying to get out of it and be a little more intentional about what you're going to do. And that will be the difference between just going along and suddenly sitting there going, holy hell, I'm done, or going, holy hell, I'm done.
Right. Yeah.
You choose. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that's a really cool way to end it. So thank you so much for giving us the time and telling us your story. I've learned a lot. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And yeah, it was awesome. Thanks.
Cheers, Charlie.